OWL 2023 was a crazy year. It went by so fast. Not the best year by any means, but it certainly could have been worse. With the season now out of the way, it's time for the long-anticipated return of the best player on every hero series. If you're watching me for the first time, what I do is run through every hero in the game and give you my honest opinion on which Overwatch League talent played said hero the best. To quickly go over a couple of thought processes and ground rules, what I'm generally looking for is who had the highest impact on the hero, be it individually and or for the team, depending on what really matters with the context and the hero and whatnot. Also, this only consists of Overwatch League players. They'll be judged on their 2023 campaign, and that alone. Nothing they've done prior, or what you've seen them do in Ranked, is relevant in the slightest. And I'm not including any of the Tier 2 teams we saw this year, your favorite streamer, or anything else in that wild imagination of yours. That's it. If you still don't understand, or you get super tilted by a random dude's opinion on the internet, that's on you. React as you please, and feel free to play along down in the comments below. I'd love to see where you think differently. And without further ado, let's get started. As per tradition, we go from left to right on the hero screen, which means that first up on tank is D.VA. And for the second straight year, she didn't see that much action. But of the few who did rely on her consistently, I'd argue that Hanbin had a pretty high impact. In his comfort for the Dallas Fuel, he often was the leader behind their dives on this hero, getting good cleanup kills as well, and generally being all over the place as you'd see from an elite D.Va player such as him. Not to mention that his defense matrix usage was pretty great as he ate a lot of pulse bombs. His numbers aren't glamorous, but when you watch Dallas Fuel in their games, you'll understand where I'm coming from. Overall, Hanbin's D.Va proved to be a great alternative that hugely boosted the Fuel's chances in a dive-heavy setting where Winston was commonly a better pick. Let's roll over to Doomfist. Doom was generally niche, but a few teams did find success with him. Fearless and the Outlaws deserve a shout out, but I think we can all agree that this one goes to Gushue. Gushue and the Spark streamed consistent results when he threw out Doom. Most teams either avoided playing him altogether or saw too many ups and downs, but not Gushue and the Spark. His Doom found major value through two avenues. For one, his pop-offs were quite impressive. Both in the summer qualifiers and the playoffs, he was a lead playmaker on the Spark. Additionally, he was a great disruptor. We saw how he could completely cancel out a game plan, like with the Fuel's Junkerqueen Sim Bastion strat. It happened a couple of times, actually, and he was quite the pest against Bastion on maps 3 and 4 in the reverse sweep game to counter their dive. Gushue was like the only player to find real value out of Doom, so it's a pretty easy choice. Next will be Junkerqueen, where I once again am picking Hanbin. I strongly believe the stuff that he did on Queen is a bit more impressive than Smurf. Don't get me wrong, Smurf deserves a huge shout out for doing some ridiculous things on her, and I think when you look at the results you can make a very strong case for Smurf. However, Smurf did have some blunders with his ults that may have costed his team games, and Hanbin had to do more with less. Hanbin carried with a significantly worse supporting cast, and he still put up similar numbers. And in that kind of situation, his queen generally would get more value. He absolutely had to put in more effort on a more consistent basis to make openings for his team. It's close when you look at everything down to a science, but when I look at Hanbin, I can just feel how much his skill on this hero translated into giving the Fuel wins, or at the very least, a fighting chance. Hanbin didn't rely on his team. The Fuel relied on Hanbin. On the topic of Smurf, he may have gotten snubbed for Junkerqueen, but he will not be getting snubbed for Best Orisa. He's gonna take this one by a landslide. Smurf did some evil things on Orisa in 2023. He pretty much took away any chance of London having tournament success. His style of play completely canceled out rush comps. He had it down to a perfect science. He was so good at neutralizing the front line and at the same time being a pest to the back line. His decision-making and awareness were top-notch. He'd save ult to cancel out Baptiste window, which I thought was pretty cool, and he had such a great balance to his play. He was really good at setting up his teammates by making space and comboing ults, but at the same time he had a lot of solo pop-offs to go with it. It might be his 5th year in the league, and it may be a new version of Orisa, but Smurf continues to stay reliable. Now for a new addition to the legacy of best player on every hero, and for the first time, we're bringing up Ramatraa. There were quite a few impressive Ram players, but I'm giving the edge to someone. It's true that sometimes Florida botched things with this comp, but usually it was on the team rather than someone himself, and outside of when he got gapped by Dante that one time, someone has put up some really solid showings on this hero. Especially if you take into account a lot of the matches from late spring stage and onward. He was countering rush comps, finding huge ult value, making a lot of space, being an annoying pest, and most importantly, beating down on some top tank players. He's gotten the best of Fearless, Smurf, Gushue, and the Rain with Ramatraa, and at a certain point, it was just obvious that Florida were the best Ramatraa rush team. A lot of the time this year, they could not be matched, and in a lot of those instances, this man was the lead playmaker. Florida had their ups and downs, but you can't deny the amazing evidence of someone being extremely talented on this hero. Next is the OG himself, Rein, and do I even need to say his name here? The German player is really good at the German hero. Go figure. Hadi is once again the Reinhardt king, and he did so a bit differently than last year. Yes, he'd still gap anybody in the mirror, but he also managed to find value on him when nobody else in the league could. Rein Rush was the only way London could win, and it was a very unpopular strategy to say the least. That led to a lot of situations where Hadi had no choice but to combat tank heroes that were usually better picks based on meta and even the map. In theory, he was almost always at a disadvantage, but that never stopped him. Hadi was a force of nature. His unorthodox playstyle made him and London practically impossible to prepare for or adjust to for that matter. His oddly aggressive decisions and seemingly random charges into the enemy backline threw even the best teams in the league for a loop. Not only was he good in the typical ways you'd rate a Rein, but he also had that second dimension with the mental warfare. The way he played definitely should not have worked, but the fact of the matter is it did, and that makes it all the more impressive and makes it very obvious that he was the best Rein. Onward to the next hero, we have Roadhog, and unless I'm mistaken, nobody tried to play Hog legitimately. The highest playtime based on my estimation is a whopping 6 seconds and 110 damage by Belos Rhea. So by default, I guess he wins. Enjoy this engaging gameplay. God, don't you just love Hog? Anyway, it's Sigma time. Purely as an individual, you might say Kaluj, but after his recent playoff performance, I think it's gotta be someone. He literally made him one of the signature hero picks on the way to a Florida championship. I don't know how you compete with such a thing. Nobody could slow him down. He pounded time after time and had clutch plays in every playoff match. We're talking insane fluxes. Comboing with Merit perfectly, someone was just a jack of all trades Sig. And impressively, he made him work on every single map type. And don't even just think of it as recency bias either. I think this helps push him over the top, but it was very obvious right from week 1 of the year that he was an elite Sigma player. He's been showing it off as early as then. The mechanics and the presence, they were always there. It's just that now he has definitely taken it to a higher level by winning a championship with his Sig play. It's one of the most memorable Sig performances in the history of this league, and that is more than enough to boost him over anybody else. Next is the most played tank of the year, Winston. Dude was a mainstay for dive comps, and you really needed a good monkey to have success. And while there were a lot of elite Winstons, I'd be a fool to give this to anybody but Fearless. Individually speaking, he just does more. He's the best to ever do it. He never ceases to amaze me. When you look at the top dive teams, it felt like Houston benefited the most from their Winston play. Other teams relied more so on different strengths, but Fearless was a focal point of the game plan, and they depended on him, and it's all because he could make something out of nothing, even in the most dire of situations. His primal heroics, that ability to up the tempo with his aggression, and think about how he had to adjust to Happy and Pelican as they swapped Tracer and Sombra roles mid-season, and therefore had to adapt to different styles and timings, and yet he still didn't look off in the slightest. The Fearless Winston is always something you can rely on, and I will gladly give him this title. As for Wrecking Ball, Ball actually did have a couple surprising uses this year, but I think we can all agree there's one guy who played him consistently and looked quite good on him. It just has to be Mag. Honorable mention definitely goes to Junbin. A lot of people will be mad about him not getting it, but Infernal genuinely had Mag on Ball for quite a few of their strategies throughout this whole year, and a lot of the time it either worked, or at the very least made them more competitive in desperate situations. Mag was asked to play Ball in a lot of planned and unplanned situations, and yet I could always see the value with it. It reminded me of Among of the old days. He low-key carried Infernal at times, little 2 and 3Ks here and there, big minefields, and just being super annoying. Be it the drawn-up version or the random pivot, Mag's Ball was oddly reliable, and he was basically the only guy to use him on a consistent basis. Even in the playoffs, he made him look good, so let's give him the dub. And wrapping up tank is Zarya, another irrelevant hero this year. It wasn't until the playoffs where she got any real playtime, and let's be honest, it was only one guy that was actually utilizing her. So for that, and generally being so damn clean on her, I'll give this honor to Hanbin. It was only for a couple of games, but Hanbin's comfort pick had its moments, and this especially goes for the matchup with Soul Infernal, where he clowned on those fools. He bullied Mag into a different dimension and was the lead cause in helping Dallas win a playoff game. Considering that Zarya barely got any use at all, I think it's impressive that Hanbin was able to casually win a playoff game on her. He was seemingly always high charge in that Infernal match, and even a little bit in the Florida match before he was forced to swap, and I'd say he put on probably the only Zarya carry of this year, so Hanbin gets this one for sure. And that wraps up the tanks. On to the damage roll. First is Ashe. An honorable mention goes to Merit here, but I decided the best Ashe this year was MN3. Ashe wasn't a super popular pick, but MN3 usually showed dominance when given the opportunity, which definitely caught my eye. The mechanics of this sniping expert was put on full display. He hit a ton of nasty shots, and he didn't just carry against APAC teams, but also some of the Western teams when given the opportunity. MN3's Ashe was a very reliable strategy on Ilios that helped keep Soul in rounds with the likes of Houston and Florida. Not to mention that he had those obvious fingerprints left on the huge early season win against the Guangzhou Charge. Ashe was one of the least popular snipers this year, but MN3 usually made her work. In a season dominated by Dive, Hanzo, and Rush, that's pretty inspiring. Next is our boy Bastion, who saw a surprise return to relevance. Numerous teams liked him a bunch, and I think it's kind of worth giving a shout out to people like Birdring, Merit, Edison, and MN3, but my pick for best Bastion by a slight margin is Sparker. I loved the Sparker Bastion for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, he was good with him in the playoffs and any other time before then. Some teams only had one or the other. Everybody on their comfort pick obviously helped lead the way to the London resurgence, but I'd argue that Sparker's raw damage output was a driving force. And I'm sorry, but how in the hell did he get all of those kills with Bastional? Like, he didn't even get any help a lot of the time. He was just pulling them out of nowhere with some insane prediction skills. Just making something out of nothing time after time. He had a lot of great individual games over the course of a couple of months, and they weren't just coming against one team or in the postseason. We're talking over the course of a decent portion of this year. Sparker's Bastion was a problem. That consistency factor, and being such a huge part of what made London so scary, is what ultimately makes me think that he deserves the best title for Bastion. Next will be Cassidy, another irrelevant hero. The most memorable cast for me, based on the season as a whole, was MN3. He put up a couple of solid outings on control maps in the early portions of the year. He was pretty much one of the only guys who dared to pick him, and he was usually a part of a nasty 1-2 punch with Skewed's BAP and rush comps, and it worked surprisingly well. Again, it wasn't a super frequent pick or anything, but whenever it happened, it was a real treat to watch. Just a talented hitscan player showing off his aim. Infernal felt like the only team that somewhat relied on Cass, so I feel pretty good about this pick. Next is Echo. She certainly saw an uptick in playtime compared to last year, but the result remains the same. Pelican is that man. I don't really know how else to describe it. When I watch Pelican play Echo, he just understands this hero in ways no one else can. He always hits the big shots when his team needs a boost. He can 2v1 an Echo with a Mercy Pocket like it's nothing. His Echo pick was just wildly successful, both in the regular season and in the playoffs, despite her not being the most popular. He just played really well on her whenever it counted. His mechanics are unmatched. His Echo was a staple to their playoff run, and that's gotta count for something, right? Pelican's Echo was absurd. He soloed people. The copies were a thing of beauty. I know I'm super glazing here, but Pelican's Echo is simply the truth. And in my opinion, individually, he was the most noticeable and the most skilled. It's Genji time, baby. There's so many amazing names to pick from. Proper, Decay, Pelican, and had he played in an Owl team, who are you? But in the end, I picked Alpha by a very slight margin. While other teams maybe found success with him overall a bit more, in my opinion, Alpha's Genji raised his team's ceiling the most. He was a game changer on this hero, and he never really felt like the complementary piece, always the guy that they'd play around. He seemingly turned a lot of fights all by himself with a crazy flurry of dashes, backline assassinations, and good blades. The Justice were just okay this year, but Alpha on a consistent Genji pick made them a threat. Think about the number of times that he opened up the game or kept his team in a series based on his deadlifts alone. I mean, he was basically the sole reason why they won a winner-go-home play-in match with New York and were able to almost reverse sweep London in that same play-in bracket. His Genji was part of the reason people thought he should even be in the MVP ballot, for crying out loud. To a similar extent to like Hanbin on Junkerqueen, Alpha always managed to do more with less. Just a goated carry on a goated hero. Okay, but how about his brother Hanzo? Well, I'm going back to the Justice with this one. This honor belongs to Flora. There's a lot of great Hanzo picks this year, but in a similar fashion to Alpha on Genji, I felt that Flora's Hanzo was a ceiling raiser. He was a good meta pick early on, but for the Justice, it felt like Flora meant more than that. Like, Hanzo is just one of those heroes that can ruin a game when you're hot, and Flora had quite a bit of those moments. Think back to the Gladiators game and how he pretty much earned a 3-0 by himself, or that time he refused to lose to NYXL on Shambali. He made so many openings out of thin air, and while it only translated to a couple of games, that's all it really takes considering that Hanzo, after the first few weeks, wasn't that relevant. He put up similar, if not better numbers than some of the best DPS in the league on some of the best teams, despite being on a worse roster. Flora was a game changer, and I want to give him respect. Considering Junkrat, I mean, for a while this was a crapshoot, but luckily Proper has saved the day by breaking out Junkrat on Gibraltar that one time against the Spitfire, and it's somehow working. Like, I think that alone makes me want to pick him for this, let alone making the spam be a problem for London and helping the Shock win the only map that actually take off London that year. It's more so the fact that he made Junk work on freaking Watchpoint Gibraltar of all maps. Like, the fact that you even made Junk useful at all is pretty awesome, so good on you, Proper. As for May, somebody like Backbone is usually a good candidate, but I really liked Checkmate this year. Whenever Florida broke out rush comps, or even the May with the Sig comp in the playoffs, Checkmate was always this sneaky dominant player you had to keep your eyes on. This guy hit so many icicle headshots. His Blizzard efficiency was the best in the league by far, and oh my god, don't even get me started on the walls. This guy's wall placements were phenomenal. He used them great offensively. His timing to cut off the enemies was perfect, and he'd even be crafty with them. He had a couple of great uses of them defensively to save teammates, but also to screw enemies over with their positioning, or even to cancel out ultimates as we saw against Smurf a couple of times. The discipline and the timing from this guy would even make the likes of Rascal proud. Just when watching him in the playoffs and in other moments, I could always feel the impact he was having on the game, and sometimes it felt like nobody was talking about it. He was so well-rounded on this hero, and it's the best Mei performance I have seen in the Overwatch 2 era. He was a team player, the walls were amazing, and when he needed to, he took over the game himself with his mechanics and his Blizzard timings. Checkmate's Mei goes extremely hard and is a very underrated aspect of what made the Mayhem so scary. Looking into Pharah, it's a pretty rare pick in 2023, so not that it matters much here, but I'm going with Jinmu for using her somewhat regularly, I guess. There was like a couple of games where he'd do it for the sake of comfort, and the results could have been worse. I mean, he even played her on freaking Circuit Royale, and they somehow won that map. The fact that he even made a consistent Pharah pick work at all definitely warrants a W here. There's not much competition, but hey, you gotta do what you gotta do. For Reaper, there's not much to say. He was also pretty irrelevant, but I think I'm gonna give this one to Merit. Like Checkmate on Mei, Merit's Reaper low-key had some crazy bright spots when Florida played Rush. Statistically, he was pretty high up there, but also he had those random moments where he'd literally team wipe out of nowhere. I don't even know how he was doing it half the time. We're talking 3, 4, even 5Ks. How did this man get so many kills with Death Blossom? I mean, it's not exactly a great ult here in the modern day. This dude was soloing, bro. We had so many moments where Florida would be engaging, you don't know how the fight's gonna turn out, and then boom, Merit goes crazy out of nowhere, and you just say, oh, okay, I guess that happened. He was good in ways that just don't make any sense. It wasn't all that often, but man did he look really good on Reaper when he got to break him out. But what about Sojourn? Well, for a while, I figured I could say Seeker or maybe Shy, but after the finals, this goes to Merit. Call it recency bias or whatever you want, but the dude literally won Finals MVP for his performance on her, and he did so convincingly as well. I mean, we were already saying he had MVP wrapped up by like the end of the second map. Doing it in the clutch fashion that he did on the big stage is just more impressive than anything else we saw this year. People are quick to forget that not every fight in the grand finals was super lopsided. Sometimes there were some nail biters, and it was on Merit to make those openings by himself by hitting the shots when it mattered. And when a grand finals is on the line and you can do something like that, that deserves a lot of praise. But on top of it, he was a good regular season Sojourn as well. Florida played less Sombra than most teams, and Merit had a lot of opportunities to make plays on her. This guy had some pinpoint accuracy. Lots of pop-offs throughout this entire year. And it's just that, in my opinion, the Finals MVP gameplay kind of pushed him over the top. You might even argue he was the best in the regular season, but with the Finals and the playoffs and stuff, there's no debating it. Next is Soldier. In my opinion, it's gotta be Hydron. He was a signature part of Toronto's late season playstyle with this character. The chaotic nature of the wide flanks were a problem. The angles were sometimes overly ambitious, and sometimes teams were ready for him, but at other times it gave enemy teams some serious headaches. Just knowing that Hydron was always going to be on some ridiculous flank made Defiant very hard to play against, and it required a lot of brain power and thinking and prepping with your positioning and splitting off your forces, which could make things a lot of the time easier for the rest of Toronto's forces. When he wasn't getting rolled into oblivion, he was either getting some good value kills or providing a good distraction for the rest of the team. That positioning was truly absurd, but it definitely worked. It especially looked good on Flashpoint and push maps where you had those wide angles and the crossfire action. It was really effective. Hydron Soldier was a big-time issue, and some teams failed miserably to adjust. He was annoying, and he beamed people down with his tracking like nobody's business. Next is gonna be Sombra, and we already know that this one goes to Lip. Lip pretty much defined the meta. The first half of Season 6 was all about Sombra dive, and Lip was the master of it. You followed his lead. The range strat was Lip go kill, and it was like that for a reason. He was so aggressive, so oppressive, so elite on this hero, how he was able to charge up those EMPs way faster than anybody else could, and just set this unmatchable tempo. If you couldn't play Sombra, then you stood no chance of competing with the Rain. And even if you could, you were still gonna lose, as evidenced by the fact that the Rain never lost in this mirror match in the first half. He just plays this hero how nobody else can. The Rain were so fast because of that style. Teams actually were discouraged from even trying the mirror. That's how dangerous he was. That's how hopeless it could feel. That's the kind of effect that he had on the game. And that is why he was an MVP candidate and why he was the best Sombra, and it's not even close. On to Symmetra, and I'd say this goes to a London player. You could pick Sparker or Backbone, both are fine, but I'll argue that it's Backbone. In my opinion, he did a very good job of orchestrating those TP shatter combos with Hottie, leading to some solid Sparker follow-up. The TP movement was super clean, and London looked very organized with Backbone in charge, and that's all that really matters, right? TP movement is where Sim's value comes into effect. The planning, the split-second decisions, the walls, not to mention some pretty good damage from time to time. Very well-rounded Sim play from Backbone, and he was an underrated leader behind London's success on these rush comps. Okay, Torb time. I can appreciate the Spectra Torb. Not a super relevant hero like I thought he'd be, but Spectra definitely made him work. As part of Toronto's unique strategy, it was on Spectra to bolster his team's defenses. Spectra was a space denier and a counter to flankers. He played the role to perfection. Spectra's Torb went crazy on both push and flashpoint maps. In some scenarios, his Torb was a map-defining pick, like against Bastion, in Vancouver, and others. Spectra's Torb is the truth, and it's time to accept it. Next, you've got Tracer, and it's just Stalker. He was the best Tracer in the league without a doubt. We talk about Lip Sombra, but Stalker's Tracer was arguably just as important to their dominance. Stalker cooked up something special, something that would make any legend of Tracer in the past feel proud. He was a man possessed out there. Countless moments of him just killing everything, willing his team to victory. In a pure Tracer dive mirror, he always came out on top. He just does more. The random multi-kills always happened at the best time. And do we even have to get into his pulse bomb stick percentage? I swear to God, he was hitting pulse bombs like a solid 10 to 15% more often than any other guy in the league. It was always a hit with him. He might be the best pulse bomb converter I've ever seen. When Stalker was on Tracer, he showed up. Think about his influential play in the mid-season madness, or how he was pretty much the only one doing anything in Atlanta's playoff match against the Spark. It felt like in every important game of Atlanta's season, Stalker was going insane on the Tracer. He put up some performances that are worth remembering. That clutch factor and all the other in-betweens make him without a doubt the best Tracer in this league. Wrapping up damage is Widow, and for the sake of moving things along, I'm picking Merit. Of anybody who picked up Widow this year, Merit feels like the one guy with consistent results. He's the one player I remember taking over on more than 2 or 3 maps, let's say. Think about that Dorado game against Boston, how he closed that one out. The Havana game against Vegas, Rialto against the Gladiators. Merit put up multiple I'm him performances. He ruined a lot of teams' hopes of making a comeback with accuracy that just isn't fair. And much like his Sojourn, Merit almost always hit the shots when his team counted on him with this Widow. So many of those plays where he's just locked into the game. This man was a living, breathing highlight reel. He didn't get to play her often, but whenever he did, he definitely made it count. Next up, Ana. For me, this one belongs to Fielder. Your best Ana likely depends on your playstyle preference. If you're into aggressive Ana play, then your guy is likely Shu or Twilight. But if you're someone like me, you prefer a more balanced and reserved style that comes with Fielder. Fielder has the ideal style for a team. It's very unselfish. It's always team-first mentality with him. Making sure his team is enabled is the #1 priority. And if everything checks out there, then he's free to open up the game himself, or in desperate situations where his team needs a bailout. And for a guy that's just a team player and supposedly a heal bot, he did that a lot. That's when we saw a very precise kind of gameplay. Fielder's Ana doesn't take a lot of risks, and yet he still found more value than most other flex supports in the game. And the reason for that is he always hit everything when he needed to. He plays very far back from his team, so the margin for error is tiny. And yet, when it came to hitting the nades and landing the big sleeps, he did it a lot. It requires a very surgical and precise aim and timing to have that stuff down and to always nail it. He almost always delivered for the Atlanta Reign, even though he had less chances than your Twilights and the Shoes of the world. He was converting at a similar rate to those guys. He gapped basically every other elite flex support in the game in this role. It took Shu having like the game of his life to barely beat the Reign in 5 maps. That's the kind of impact Fielder's Ana had. He almost always came up clutch against the top teams. Fielder was in the MVP conversation, and a lot of it has to do with his Ana play. Next is Baptiste. This one may draw some controversy, as a lot of people would agree there's about 3 good candidates. You could say Shu, Landon, or RuPaul. All for different reasons too, but in the end, I went with RuPaul. Somebody like Shu is the best of the bunch mechanically, but compared to the other two, he just didn't play as much BAP. As for Landon, he was a lifesaver and very skilled, but it mostly came in a very small section of the season on just a single comp. RuPaul is the most well-rounded of the bunch. He has the proven feats on the hero across the entirety of this year in multiple compositions, not to mention some solid cooldown management and awareness. And I'd argue in some instances, his mechanics are even better than Shu's. I mean, he literally outplayed the guy in the playoffs, did he not? RuPaul was really solid from a team perspective like Landon, but he also just showed the mastery of this hero individually that you're looking for. When you watch RuPaul closely, he just has all the little kinks worked out. It never feels like even a second is being wasted with his gameplay. He's got the shoot-heal system down to a science, and with how precise it feels with the aim and the flicks and the movements, it almost feels robotic, like too perfect almost. This is what BAP was meant to be played like. This feels like Baptiste being used at maximum potential. This is what true mastery of this hero looks like in its purest form. Speaking of mastery, how about Brig, where I think it surely would go to Chio, the other half of the league's most unkillable backline. Chio very rarely made mistakes on Brig. Usually Atlanta only lost fights when he had that rare mistake. That's the kind of impact he had on the game. He helped uplift Donghack to Rookie of the Year status alongside Fielder, and speaking of Fielder, the peel for him, his fellow support, was probably the best I've ever seen from a Brig player, or maybe even a support player in general outside of a Mercy pocket. Diving Atlanta's backline felt like suicide, and you already know a lot of it comes down to Chio and his smarts. Chio genuinely had the most impactful season I have ever witnessed out of a main support. It's so rare for his role to get any love or attention, but through his dominance on Brig, he was a role star and a borderline MVP, and a bunch of it came on Brig. With all that recognition in mind, I think we can all agree that he was the best on this hero. Now for the game's newest hero, Illari. Her time on the big stage was not what we hoped it be, but at least one man consistently cashed in on her crazy potential. The best Illari of 2023 is obviously Sir Majed. No one else really played her to begin with, but whenever anyone even dared to try, the difference was night and day. be it in the mirror match or just comparing the gameplay in general. Majed hard carried on her. He put on some disgusting displays with some of the shots he was landing. Just an extra dimension to Toronto's stacked arsenal of playmakers. Majed and his team used a very unique playstyle, and a lot of it was centered around what he could create. And more often than not, he delivered. Majed gave us a glimpse of what the future of pro play could look like on this hero one day if she gets a buff. You're watching a predecessor in real time. This dude was one of the only players in the league to not give up on her and make it work. Let's talk about Kiriko. I think we can mostly agree that this belongs to Violet. I'd like to give an honorable mention to Creative, as I also thought he was very good on her, but Violet takes the cake. His aggression and pinpoint accuracy is how this hero was meant to be utilized. Like Majed in the previous entry, Violet's Kiri adds another dimension to what made Houston so dangerous. Well, that, and Houston were like one of the only teams to willingly play her on a somewhat regular basis. That kind of helps too. But hey, whenever he busted her out, he definitely made it work and had some effectiveness. He found results with some sick headshots, and it proved to be a good strategy on control and push maps. Amongst the chaos, the Outlaws kind of let him loose, go on his own angles and flanks, and a lot of the time, it worked pretty well. And at the end of the day, you can't argue with the results. It's Lifeweaver time, and we all know that this one is going to Rack Attack, baby. He may not have won any games in the regular season, but damn it, he is gonna win in this video. Now, in all fairness, he pretty much wins by default, but regardless, Rack was the only guy in the entire league to use this hero unironically. We're talking as part of an actual strategy, and in his defense, he made it work the best he could. As seen in the London series, especially on Gibraltar, his trees saved lives, and his pulls kinda acted like Mercy's res, where it gave Vegas a lot of bailouts and second chances from the mistakes they made with overcommitments and with positioning. And when you're a bad team like them, you can use all the second chances you can get, as it's gonna bolster your chances of winning, even if it's ever so slightly. Rack's Weaver wasn't anything groundbreaking, but I can appreciate the attempt. The fact that it even worked at all is pretty cool. On Lucio, I kinda had a hard time picking, but in the end I went with the rookie from the Dallas Fuel, Bliss. In my opinion, he was robbed of an Eastern role star, and a lot of it has to do with his Lucio play. He has that proactive style that makes him more compelling than the average Lucio, as he showed off many of those fine, I'll do it myself moments that you're looking for with the boops and whatnot, the environmentals, the slippery you can't touch me moments. And in the modern era, you need a Lucio who can be a leader, who can actually make the main support role impactful without overstepping. He had more playtime than somebody like Chio, but also less feeding moments than Lee Jae-gon. He was a good blend of balance without sacrificing impact. And other than Hanbin, Bliss on Lucio might have been the Fuel's biggest bright spot. He literally won games for them, and if your Lucio is having that kind of reach, I'd say it's fair to give you this honor. With Mercy, I mean, who cares, right? She sucks, and she's boring, so let's just give it to Nisha, because he did like a decent job of pocketing Leave's Echo in a winning effort, I guess? You blue beamed him, you rezzed him, you did what you were supposed to do to help your carry do his thing. Not much more you can ask for. Okay, but how about Moira? Well, there was one team that looked okay with her, that being RuPaul and the Mayhem. He did pretty decent on control maps behind Merit and someone in the rush setup. He'd keep those guys nice and healthy on the front line, he got quick calls, he got kills with said calls from time to time. That's all you can really hope to accomplish on Moira, you know, a very simple hero with no real utility. He needed to keep pace in rush comps, and he did, so that's good enough for me. And last, but certainly not least, is Zen. Man, such a big time downtick in playtime this year. He really was not viable even for some of the top players in the game, but one guy that at least found some success I found was Skewed. Inferno played a fair amount of Zen in the first half of 2023, and Skewed generally put out some of the only highlight-worthy plays in notable stat lines. From what I can tell, he certainly had the most frags. It actually felt like an effective pick sometimes, unlike when somebody such as Violet broke him out. Skewed was probably the only guy to frag on him a couple of times and not totally feed his brains out in the process. guess, so that by itself should be enough to award him the best Zen player of the year. And with that said, that wraps up the 5th yearly tradition of the best player on every hero. This was probably the last one I'll ever have the pleasure of doing by season since Owl is on its way out. I do hope that you found this entertaining, as well as any of the others if you've been sticking with me throughout the years. And if you enjoyed this one in particular, it would mean the world to me if you could leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your friends. I have to put a lot of time and effort into these, so giving it some more reach would greatly help me out. And of course, feel free to leave your own list down in the comments below, or even if you just disagree with me. Oh, and if you maybe want an updated best player on every hero of all time now that Owl is on its way out, let me know, because that's something that may be in the works in the near future. So just let me know what you think. Anyway, I wanted to thank all of you so much for watching this video and supporting my content over the years. I can't believe that after 5 years, people still look forward to these videos. I am eternally grateful to you all, and I can't thank you enough for sticking with me and always being excited for these. You guys always make it worth putting in the effort to get these out. And until the next one, guys, I'm out. Peace.